Hello everyone and welcome to LewisFiction and welcome to rewriting Zeb Wells' Spider-Man Run. I'm going to be scoping over the run that Zeb Wells has done on the Amazing Spider-Man and changing a few things around while still keeping his base ideas intact. This video's purpose is to give a little bit more direction, a little bit more progression to the character of Peter Parker rather than just keeping him at the status quo level the whole run, but still taking some of the themes and some of the ideas of Zeb Wells' original run and try to incorporate them into something a little bit more successful and something that resonates with the fans. So without further ado, let's get straight into this. One thing that I do want to point out before we do get started is that there are many side stories that were a part of Wells' run, such as the Rec Rap stuff, Dark Web, etc. However, in this video, I'm mainly going to be tackling the main story between Peter and Norman, and all the Rabin and MJ stuff that happened during the beginning. So jumping in, the first major change that I will make is that the comic doesn't open with it being Peter's fault, quote unquote. I've always hated the idea of what did Peter do and the way that this whole run began and the story that was presented. Peter in the original version of the comic genuinely didn't do anything wrong, but every character seems to think this was Peter's fault. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, essentially, Peter was part of the reason as to why MJ was sent to an alternate dimension, but ultimately, Peter tried to stop it from happening, so it wasn't directly his fault. But here in this version, we're going to change that. The story opens with Peter broke, living off scraps in his apartment, wishing MJ was there to help him. As the audience, we wonder what happened to Peter and MJ after the end of Spencer's run, but she is nowhere to be seen. In this version of the story, it isn't made clear yet whether they are broken up or something has happened to her. That is to be revealed later on. He is currently looking for a job, but his lack of punctuality in previous employment gets him rejected, which of course shows consequence for the character and has previous things that have affected him in his life come back to bite him here in this story. Peter can't pay his rent at all until he's approached by Norman Osborn. In the original version of the book, Peter ends up trusting Norman again. However, in my version, he never will. Norman, however, will continue to make advances on Peter, trying to get him to work at Oscorp, but the trauma of Gwen Stacy's death still haunts Peter enough to never make him trust Norman ever again. Peter ends up getting a job at a local coffee shop, but this is short-lived as Peter's obsession with keeping an eye on Norman Osborn thickens. He eventually is fired from his job, and he's back to square one. Once again, Peter is wishing MJ was here, as he ends up visiting her grave at the end of the first couple of issues, striking a big twist into the series. Is MJ dead? That will be the new catchphrase of this series. Therefore, the opening tagline goes from "What did Peter do?" to "What happened to Mary Jane?" Peter is angry with himself at the end of this reveal, stating that one day he will find her, which obviously shrouds it in mystery a little bit more, adding an extra layer of depth to the mystery of the story. The next few issues we flash back a few months earlier, where MJ and Peter were about to move in together, like we saw in the original book. They are then attacked by Rabin. Rabin plans to become the overruler of everything, but his plan is foiled by Peter. However, MJ is a casualty, as when Peter banishes Rabin back to his home dimension, MJ accidentally is sent back as well. Peter spends a good chunk of time trying to find his way to this alternate dimension. However, he has no luck and MJ seems to be stuck forever. Scared that Rabin will return, Peter is Spider-Man at an all-time high. This flashback sequence over a few issues sends us back to present day, where MJ returns to our dimension. However, she comes back with someone else, a man called Paul. We get an issue with MJ and Paul explaining how they escaped. Paul helps MJ in returning home, however, something seems off about him. Also, in my version of events, MJ and Paul will not have their kids either. They won't exist at all. I thought they were a useless B-plot that never actually got expanded upon, and I feel like if they're going to add some kind of emotional weight to MJ and Paul's story, what is the point of having them around in the first place? Therefore, they are going to be taken out of this story completely. And for those of you that are wondering, yes, MJ and Paul are still together. Now put down your pitchforks and just wait for the rest of the story, because I promise this all turns out a lot better than it did in Wells' run. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm still using Wells' themes and ideas. However, like I mentioned, I am executing them a little differently. As they return home, MJ has to explain to Peter how she used Paul as emotional support, and they are now in a relationship with one another. As it turns out, time passes differently in the other dimension, and it's been 5 years for MJ, whereas it's only been a few months for Peter. Peter is destroyed, even more than he has been all the way up until this point in this run, and he hits rock bottom. This will be the period of time where the Judgment Day story happens as well, as Peter reminisces of Gwen Stacy. This reminder of Gwen puts Peter's focus back onto Norman Osborn, scared that he may become the Green Goblin once more. During this time, Norman starts feeling like an outcast. We will have a few issues that really delve into his psyche. He is a genuine person, and he does have rid of his sins, and he feels like he can do some good in the world, so he decides to become the Gold Goblin. And with that, we move on to the finale of the Rabin saga, as Rabin reveals himself once again. And as it turns out, Rabin this whole time was actually Paul. In the original comics, Paul is Rabin's son, but I thought it would be way more interesting if Paul was actually Rabin himself, but in disguise. And when MJ got trapped in the other dimension, I thought it could add an extra layer of depth to the story if it was revealed that all this time he was manipulating MJ, using her as a way to get back at Peter for foiling his plan, and also using MJ as a way to get back to the original dimension to defeat Spider-Man once and for all. Rabin tries to kill MJ in front of Peter, but Peter, along with the Fantastic Four, Miss Marvel, and Miles Morales, take down Rabin in an epic fight. Norman Osborn will also be there to help as the Gold Goblin. However, during this battle and afterwards when Norman tries to become a superhero, he will almost be blacklisted by the other heroes. He will be ignored, shunned, and told to go home. This will all play out throughout this battle, and because obviously everyone's focus is on the battle itself, this will kind of go maybe slightly unnoticed. But that's on purpose. It's meant to be in the background, and it's meant to be very subtle and very niche. But it's a very important piece of information and a very important detail to the story to remember. This is when Norman starts to realize the full extent of the damage that he did as the Green Goblin. This is when we get a few issues from Norman's perspective, and we start to feel empathetic from him. Peter won't trust him, none of the other heroes will trust him, even though he's trying to do good in the world. Norman starts to feel like the Green Goblin was his only purpose in life, as whenever he tries to make a difference elsewhere, he genuinely just is ignored. The only thing that he was good at was being the Green Goblin, and no matter what he did, people would never see him differently. You can sort of see what direction we are going with this story now, but we'll expand upon that later. On the Peter side of things, he reconnects and reconvenes with MJ, as MJ apologizes for being so naive. Peter will also understand that a lot can change in 5 years. MJ is also now 5 years older than Peter, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't care any less about him. MJ says that she isn't ready for another relationship yet, but doesn't want to make Peter feel like he isn't in her life. From this point on, they will be friends, slowly rekindling their relationship and the life that they were trying to build under Nick Spencer's run on the book. So it doesn't completely destroy all the progress Nick Spencer made, but at the same time, it adds a little bit of conflict and maybe a slight bit of tension into the relationship. We know that they're going to get back together, but it is just a slow process. During this time, this is where most of the Janice Lincoln story will happen, including the Tombstone stuff as well, with the wedding between Janice and Randy and gang war. I didn't see a lot wrong with any of these side plots, and if anything, if I'm being completely honest, I thought this was one of the better stories in Zeb Wells' run. I really do like how he handles Tombstone, and I really like how he handles all the gang stuff and that kind of style of story in these books. So I'm gonna keep that all pretty much the same. Also, one other thing that I do want to remove from this run as well is the small fling relationship that Peter had with Black Cat. It was so unnecessary, and everyone knew that they were going to break up. So yes, Black Cat will appear in this series, and she will end up helping Peter with a few things here and there, but no, they will not date. Coming to the end of the run, Norman runs himself into the ground, and his mental state is on the floor. He once again tries to reach out to Peter for help, but he is left with no response. This is when Norman approaches the Goblin Queen and asks for his sins to be reversed into him, seeing no other life for him after trying everything. This way, Norman's downfall into becoming the Green Goblin is Peter's fault. Peter's lack of trust for Norman Osborn and his lack of willingness to accept that he's changed has been the reason that Norman descends back to being the Goblin again. This is a minor change to the story that Wells wrote, but I think it's way more poetic and adds several more layers to both characters. Norman, with his sins back, will look to hurt Peter in the worst way possible. And what's the best way to do that? Of course, Mary Jane Watson. The finale of this run will end with Peter, MJ, and the Green Goblin for one final rodeo. It's the most brutal fight Peter and Norman will have ever had. The Goblin will even try to kill Mary Jane, but Peter will manage to save her, which also brings his regret about Gwen's death full circle as well. Which also links back to the Judgment Day story that we saw at the beginning of the run as well. You see, it all ties together in the end. I also would like to make the comparison that this would be very similar to how Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man saved MJ in No Way Home, and how that was kind of a reflection of Gwen's death and the chance that he never got to save her. I feel like the same thing would sorta be implied here as well. The run will finally end with the Goblin being taken down forever, never to return. Peter and MJ will finally get things back on track. They will move in with each other and will continue the trend that Spencer was trying to set up. Peter will propose to MJ and she says yes, leaving them happily ever after. So that's what I'd do if I had to rewrite Zeb Wells' Spider-Man run, using the same ideas, themes, and even using some of the same connective tissue that he had in those books as well. I personally believe it's a lot more coherent, and I think it represents what a lot of fans would like from Spider-Man more than what we actually got in the original run. Let me know if you liked it in the comment section down below. I want to hear all your thoughts, and how would you rewrite Zeb Wells' Spider-Man run? Here's some more videos on the screen right now that you can watch if you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and peace.